Hello, everyone. My name is Wanda Gray, and I'm the Education Manager for Crayola. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar on art as a persuasive language. Our presenter today is Sherry Sturman, our Crayola Director of Education, and we also have a guest presenter that we're happy to introduce, and that's Melissa Hayes, Art Education Specialist with Luther Conant School in Acton, Massachusetts. Also, if you have not already done so, if this is your first time joining us, or even if you've been with us a few times but have not joined the Champion Creativity, the Power of Art Infused Education community, please do so. By being a member, you will receive invitations to the upcoming webinars. You will have access to webinar recordings and resources in our library, and you will be able to participate in online discussions as well as access CE quizzes that will be available there. To do so, please join the link that is posted at the bottom right-hand side of the screen to join to become a member. Also, to get your certificate of completion for today's webinar, EdWeb will send to you a certificate to the email address that you used to log into today's webinar. And you should receive that within the next business day. If you join live by phone, you will have to take a quiz, a brief 4-question quiz that you will be able to access in the webinar archives, as well as if you watch the recording, you would also have to take that short quiz, which you can access within the archives. So you would have to join the community to do so. Okay, well, I think we're ready to get started. At this time, Sherry, I will toss it over to you.
Great, thank you. So we are really excited about this topic. And to introduce the co-presenter, who you see illustrated, Melissa Hayes. I love that her students provided this illustration of her. And in a few minutes, you'll hear the backstory about how the students created what is really an advertisement for Melissa's art class, which is really cool. So in addition to the background information about Melissa that you see on the screen, of course, her being the art specialist at her school, just want to say how excited we are that she's going to be the incoming president of the Massachusetts Art Education Association. And it's really exciting that she's sharing her leadership with that group of art leaders. And also want to share that Melissa is one of our Crayola master teachers. So she is a freelance consultant for Crayola and helps us to write our content, the big ideas that translate into classroom activities. So really excited that she's joining us today. So let's get into the subject, art as a persuasive language. I don't know how many of you have participated in some of our other multi-literacy webinars. It was fun in the beginning, where people were telling us if this was their first or if they've attended multiple Crayola webinars on EdWeb. But for those of you who have, you'll remember that we often talk about the parallels between visual literacy and written and spoken literacy, because art is a language. It conveys meaning. It uses a symbol system, just like other forms of language. And our point really here today is art is an extremely powerful, persuasive language. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into how art does convince others, convey meaning, and actually persuade thoughts and feelings. So before we dive in, I just want to make the new first-time participants in a Crayola webinar aware of something that we'll come back to at the end, but you might want this heads up to be thinking about what you will create as we go through the session. So we always provide a Crayola webinar giveaway. You can receive free Crayola product by creating artwork. We provide the prompts and the background information during the webinar. And you would just post that artwork that's either made by you or by a student in the Champion Creativity community. And for this webinar, that art would be advertising an event, an idea, or an item. Just like you saw on the front page, a student advertising Melissa's art class. So you would post that art by April 3rd, and the first 50 educators who post will win a case of Crayola glitter markers. When when Melissa and I were talking about what would be a fun product to give away for this one, we were inspired by advertising and perception and said, you know that phrase, not everything that glitters is gold? And so we thought, glitter markers, that's right. That will make it a really powerful point and to show how visuals persuade. So that's what you can receive after the webinar if you post. You'll also know that we start every session by outlining our objectives. So what you'll know what we're going to cover in this session. So we're going to explore the power of art to convey meaning. And visual literacy really is a way of communicating. Human brains are hardwired to respond to visual stimuli. And really, whether you're conscious of it or not, everything you see impacts how you think, how you feel, and the decisions you make. So it's a very powerful experience. You'll see what Melissa's going to share, how she used this with her students, to have students be thinking critically and analytically about the advertisements they see and how those visuals impacted how they feel, what they want, and what they believe about products or events. We are going to use a unique Crayola protocol that we call SEEK to read art and to read the advertisements. So we'll be decoding the visuals in these ads to gain insights. And then the really fun creative part is when you get the information about how to do your creative work, create ads that persuade. So I'd like to start off with that reference to neuroscience. So when you look anthropologically and when you look at what neuroscience now can tell us, it's very clear that the human brain is hardwired for visual clues. And looking at the history of humans, we have always been focused on visual clues. In fact, the capacity for vision came way before language and symbol systems. So art, or really any visual, functions as that primary means of transferring information and being very sticky so we remember what we see. And that's an important foundation when you think about art as a language. And I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to provide some other context.
Yeah, so this dovetails nicely with what Sherry was just talking about. So visual communication has really become more complex, especially in 2017. And so it's really more important than ever that our children and just adults know and understand what being visually literate means and understanding how to decode visual messages. So I'm going to back up a little bit, though, and talk about just go over again what visual literacy is. So it's really the ability to understand and interpret and evaluate visual messages. So in other words, it's about reading pictures and that this meaning can be communicated through the process of reading these pictures. So our students are dealing with how to navigate the world and understand what is communicated visually. You know, they're not just reading text. So it's important that they learn how to communicate visually and how to decode. I think about some older students, you know, navigating social media and figuring out how to understand what's being communicated. But even just for our younger students, it's important to focus on visual literacy because what they are able to recall can be multiplied when you combined reading and actual visual literacy. So it's really important for them to understand how to communicate with society. Let me slide to the next slide. And then we were really thinking about research in advertising. And for me, color is something that really stands out. I don't know if you're all looking at me, but I have purple hair. It's what I'm drawn to. And so we thinking about advertising and design and art. Part of what I was thinking about is that advertisers use this research they use research about how color is affected to develop their brand and how they're communicating visually. And so interesting in the research that I did for this unit, I realized it's not necessarily that color conveys emotions, like blue is sad and red is angry, even though we see that a lot of times. It's more nuanced than that. It's more about color being on brand or off brand. So for this visual here that you're looking at, this is an advertisement one of my students created for our school's ice cream social. And if you're not from my district, you might not realize this, but blue and gold are Acton Boxborough colors. And so this is completely on brand for the district. So my student, just he didn't know that he was, selecting these colors that were on brand, because it wasn't something, we were talking about what's the Acton Boxborough brand. But it's something that he just did instinctually and that advertisers actually do based on lots of research. So just thinking about that color and design and how it affects the viewer. So we have these 3 essential questions, and I just want to sort of talk about what we just teased out for you. So the first one focuses on neuroscience, what Sherry was talking about. And so it's considering how you can utilize the insight that vision came long before language, and it was the initial communication system, and that it serves as a primary means to transfer and retain information. So think about how using that with your students and your children. And then the societal, think about like how can being visual literate benefit a consumer. So what, when you're able to decode visuals and ads, how does that benefit you? Are you able to figure out, is this an ad, a product that I need or I want, or am I just, being convinced of this because of it's the color or the pattern? And then finally, considering how color and design can impact the choices you or your students make. And so it's just being aware of this and using it. This was sort of the catalyst for this entire unit, because being an art teacher, I know I'm sort of intrigued and I can be really excited about certain colors and patterns. Like if a notebook has a fun pattern, I want to buy it. And so I've had to sort of train myself. This is something that I don't need. And so I'm sort of combating that the visual design that I'm drawn to. So again, we've already talked about this a little bit, but this is the big idea. So I think it's important to go over this. So art conveys meaning. So humans are always looking for meaning. When I show my students non-representational art where I'm like, there is no meaning, this is just focusing on color, line, pattern, they are looking for that meaning all the time. So we, are constantly looking around the world, looking for meaning in the images and the text and what we're seeing around us and what we interact with. And then the elements of art and principles of design, which we'll highlight a little bit in just a minute, are sort of how designers and artists use the vocabulary for how they communicate meaning. And so we'll look at those in a little bit and talk about that some more. And then finally, thinking about what it is to decode, to actually be visually literate. It really has to do with seeing and not just looking. And so I sort of think of seeing as the slowing down. Like if you're looking at something, it can just be really quick. But really seeing means you're observing, you're noticing. And so that's something that students have to do when they're visually literate. So now we're going to go quickly through some of the elements of art and principles of design. Some of you may be familiar with this. This might be new for some of you. For more detailed information about them, there's lots of resources online. If you search elements of art, principles of design, you'll be able to find those. The sort of general idea, though, is that the elements of art are like the ingredients in a recipe, and then the principles of design are the actual recipe. So it's how those ingredients are used. So you can break down an image to understand its meaning and purpose by looking at how the elements and principles of art and principles of design were used. So this is sort of the vocabulary that we can use when we're talking about the work that we're looking at and trying to decode it for meaning. So what we have in the next series of slides relate to the elements of art and principles of design, as well as vocabulary you might be used to seeing in reading, writing, and literacies, just so there's sort of the connection that you can make from being visually literate. So line is sort of the most basic element of art. And so you can think about that relating to the design of font and how a font can look and how it can highlight text. So same thing, line and artwork can do a similar thing. And then we have color. I really like thinking about the element of art of color as related to like the adjectives and adverbs. So it's the colorful commentary, and you can see how the color in the text actually on the slide actually sort of relates to the feeling and highlights it. And then space and form could be related to setting and characters and plots. And these are components that often make up the composition in literature. And then for pattern and movement, rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, so that pattern that you have in how words are read or how they're said relates to how artwork can have a pattern or that movement as well. And then we have balance and emphasis. So you can think about how there can be a focus or a focal point in a story, and sort of that's similar to power and personality and relationships. So the last one, rhythm. Simile and metaphor are related to contrast. So thinking about compare and contrast different things relate to contrasts in your artwork. So now Sherry's, and I know that was a very quick run through, but Sherry's going to facilitate some close looking at some student art to really flex our visual literacy muscle. But I do want to plant a seed while we're practicing that. Start thinking about some curriculum connections. So how you might use having your students practice decoding an image, not necessarily an advertisement, but how practicing that decoding could be used in your curriculum.
Excellent, great. Before you flip slides, actually, I just wanted to suggest that all the participants take just a really soak this slide in, because this is the vocabulary that I would love for you to use as we talk about the images that are coming up. And that what I love is this vocabulary is so rich in the classroom, and that it's great to hear students of all ages. Melissa, shares with us, even her youngest students really are very articulate in using this vocabulary. So I just want everybody to soak it in and take a good look at it, because it's exactly what we're going to be talking about as we look at images. So please let your fingers do your talking, and as we go through the next few slides, and we actually have a collaborative discussion through the text box, decode this piece of student artwork using that protocol that I mentioned, which is SEEK. And just as Melissa was saying a few minutes ago, it's so important to see and to articulate what we see. So seeing is so much a part of SEEK. Before we flip the slide and help to show what is the acronym of SEEK, I just want you to take a really nice look of this picture in its fullest size. And I would like to point out that the student who created this, Emma, from Massachusetts, we have some very strong Massachusetts representation here today, a fifth grader at the time that she created this beautiful piece of artwork. And you can see that she wrote in her own handwriting a statement about creativity right in the middle of the art, but because it's kind of small and handwritten, also towards the side, we pulled it out, repeated it in text. So if your screen is a little small, I just want to say that the words of wisdom that Emma, a fifth grader, told us is creativity gives us wings. Creativity shapes the world, giving us wings. If there is no creativity, the world is barren, a barren field without color. So I always like to start with this incredible wise insight in this amazing piece of artwork. I see someone asked a few minutes ago on the question, Nan was asking in the text box, what ages is this webinar geared to? And what I love is that teachers are so skilled at extracting insights that are applicable to every grade they teach. We have actually taught much of this content in venues that have very mixed age groups, like the National Council of Teachers of English and the International Literacy Association. And pre-K teachers, high school teachers, college faculty all say there was great insights that they can apply to the developmental level of their students. So the answer is this webinar is applicable to educators of all ages, who teach all ages. So let's look at Seek. Take this deep dive into this beautiful image. And when we break down the word seek, we're really talking about this protocol of reading children's art, reading art just as if we were reading or decoding text. What I love is that this acronym, these 4 letters, each stand for something very important in the process of reading art. But I love when an acronym comes together as a word. It helps it be sticky so you remember it. And I love it even more when it's a real word that means what we're talking about. So a classic definition of seek is that we're searching for meaning, we're trying to understand, we're asking, we're trying to figure it out. And so let's walk through what each of these 4 letters stand for in this unique Crayola protocol for reading artwork. So first, we say S, see. What do you see? Please start typing in the chat box what you see. Yes, Susan's saying she sees shadow in the water. I love that. You're reading from the bottom up, and the first thing that caught your eye were some shadows. And so what does that tell us? What does that say in terms of how light is coming in? And I'm wondering, Susan, if you think that light might be coming from the moon and the stars you see behind you. So someone is talking about the tower. Interestingly, it looks really similar to the classic Eiffel Tower in Paris. So similar. So that makes us, when we get to the questions part, some of you might wonder, what does this child know about the Eiffel Tower of Paris? Keep going with what you see. You see that image, that character, has wings and a smiling face. So you're calling it a dragon flower. I've heard people describe it in other ways, but you're noticing right there that face and the wings. Oh, so Julie sees the inventions, right? There's a lot of nature in the picture, but there's also man-made inventions. Love that. So what I'm loving about your comments is Marilyn sees freedom. You see joy. So part of what you're talking about, what you see, is very literal, like the evidence. Let's go to the next question, evidence. And part of it is this overarching, when you say, I see freedom, I see joy, then the next question is, so what is your evidence? So Lauren, you said joy. What is your evidence of seeing joy, right? Is it that smile on that face? Is it the sense of coloring? Is it the motion of the main character flying? So when you say that you see something like peace or freedom or joy, then describe the evidence, right? And remember the language that Melissa just introduced you to. So part of your evidence for what you see could be a conversation about balance or proportion. And one of the things that strikes me is this moving, flying character human-esque with wings, reminiscent of the dragonfly, however you might describe this character. This character is almost the same size as the Eiffel Tower. Now think about that. It's pretty powerful. So what is this artist telling us about human capacity and about imagination, right? Because this is not a very literal human. It's got human elements, but it's an imaginative character. And that imaginative character is as large, looming as large as the very tall Eiffel Tower, right? So, and I love your comments, Marilyn, right? So you're seeing that, you're seeing evidence that this could be grounded in France, right? You're seeing motion, you're seeing movement in the dress, absolutely. It's as if the skirt on the dress is flowing and flapping as the wings are moving, absolutely. So part of it is what do you see as an overarching point, and then part of it is that evidence, right? So it seems as if she likes the idea of flying, that there's a theme of flying in the character and in the inventions, absolutely, and our evidence is there are multiple things that fly. In fact, there's something in the left corner overshadowing the moon that also looks like another flying object, absolutely. So often when people tell us what they see and what's their evidence, they talk about the tone. And the tone, let's go to our next D, is often informed when we explain the artist's decision. So a few minutes ago, we were just talking about the what we saw, right? We talked about the objects and the characters. Now, what we want to focus on with our second E, which is explain the artist's intention, is to really focus on how it was created and to really help students understand that every decision an artist makes is important in conveying this overall message, right? It's key to part of our reading. The art is not only to say, what do we see and why do we say that, but it's also important to look at the technique and the decisions that have been made. So often people start with the color palette, right? Seem to be very conscious that there were a lot of cool colors here. And as Melissa pointed out, color is a key part of how we communicate through art. So we see this very soothing, cool blue background. We see blue again reflected in the water. We see the cool green. What is a warm color that's popping for us? And what does that say, right? So the warm colors, we see this warm, towering Eiffel Tower. And we also see warm colors in the rainbow hair. This beautiful flowing rainbow hair on our main character. So color is a very important part of how the artist made the decision. But also think about the technique. Clearly that sky was done with a watercolor technique. When you get close, you can see the texturing. It almost appears as if the artist used the salt on watercolor technique of pulling the color forward and leaving some space with the salt evaporation technique. There's a blending of colors. There's an interesting horizon line where the green meets the blue. So really be thinking, share with us some additional comments that you have. I see a lot of comments about color, looks calm, what adds to that calmness, Marilyn? Perhaps Lorraine's comment that the watercolor adds to the calm, absolutely. And the sense of freedom is coming in with the colors. Oh, I love your comment, Margaret, about it feels surreal to you. There's absolutely an imaginative, surreal element to this. What a lovely conversation to have with students about what is real and what is surreal. So you're really starting to pick up on that fantastic vocabulary. I would also hear people talk about this as being very magical, right? Very imaginative and very magical. And then what would be the evidence of that, both in the objects and in the way this young fifth grade artist chose to present them to us? And so that brings us to know. K. The K of seek is really a part of diving deeper with the students. So what do we know? Now that we've talked about the see, the evidence, the explain, what do we know? And that, of course, inquiry-based education says, what else do we want to know? And this is a fabulous conversation to have with students, right? So we can know a lot about the techniques that were used, the materials that were used, the effect that it had on us with this sort of dreamlike, surreal piece. So the first thing that I always am struck by when I say, what do we know? Is we know this young 5th grade artist was incredibly insightful about creativity. And we know that because of the comment that the student wrote right into the art. So what I want to know what kind of conversations were going on in the class about creativity, and what other voices and insights about creativity were part of that discussion. So Tracy's saying that we know that this picture is about place and exploration, and so Tracy would like to know, where does the artist want to go? Absolutely. So we also know the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. This looks very much like the Eiffel Tower. So what we might want to know is, has the student been to Paris? Did the student just read a book about Paris? What inspired the thought of Paris in a piece of art that clearly is talking about inventions, inventiveness, and creativity? And we certainly know that there are a variety of people busy on the bottom of the scene, in addition to the main character that we've talked about who's floating and flying. But I would want to know the choicefulness around those. Are those other characters helping to round up the point about creativity? They seem to be in motion, but I'm very curious. And one of the things we find when students start using Seek, particularly in talking about other student work, it is absolutely delicious, wonderful, when they can turn to the student in their class or their school and say, I know this about the piece of art you created, and this is what I want to know. Talk about inquiry-based education. It doesn't get any better than that. So we're really helping students shape their insights and their inquiry and lead that. How wonderful when there can be a discussion about a piece of art that was created in your school. Oh, I love that Lauren just talked about all the math that you could be reading in this piece of art. That's brilliant. Absolutely, Lauren. The Eiffel Tower has so much math. It's got some symmetry. It's got sets. It's got subsets. But then you could read so much math in the whole piece itself. We had just talked about size and balance and proportion. So beautiful. Okay, so you know how to do it now. You've just used Seek. We'll use it again later, but I'd like to move to a what if question. What if this piece of student artwork was used in an advertisement? If we were to use this as a foundation of an ad, what might be the main idea of the ad, the intent of the ad? So think about and type into the chat box. Oh, we were talking about travel ads. That's interesting. Modes of transportation. Interesting. An ad about freedom. Interesting. Okay. So some ideas that we've heard is, what if the main idea of this ad was reflect on your creative experiences, or reflect on the power of invention, innovation, and creativity, and that the Eiffel Tower might be there as an iconic form of a very inventive piece of architecture, and all of those flying machines are inventions. So what if this was an ad about invention and creative experiences? Or what if it was an ad urging people to be inspired by big ideas, starting with their own big ideas, right? What if it was a very, if the call to action in this ad was telling people, be inventive, right? Jump from this springboard you see here and about being inventive. Or what if it's an ad about imagination and imagining yourself in new ways? So a fun ad that I have seen from this that has been a creative springboard is, imagine yourself with superpowers. What are your superpowers, right? So, and I'm saying here, right, reach for the moon. So you're talking about striving. We see the moon here, striving high. And it's absolutely a 5th grade. I can guarantee it, Margaret, absolutely. And so imagine your own possibilities. Great messages. So one of the things that really struck us when we looked at this piece of artwork is when we were talking about the Crayola essence, the DNA, what drives our brand? We often use the expression that Crayola's purpose, our intent, our main idea at Crayola is that we bring colorful wings to the invisible things that live in the hearts and the minds of children. And that really had been articulated as our brand essence. And then we showed colleagues this beautiful piece of artwork that a child had included in an art exhibition that we had asked for. And we were like, oh my goodness, this student really said it perfectly. Is there any better way to say, bring colorful wings to the invisible things that live in the hearts and minds of children? So we got excited. We thought, what if we use this art in an ad? So, and I wonder if you can see up on the upper left-hand corner where the logo has some colorful wings on it. And it actually says, if you can read that fine, small yellow print, give colorful wings to invisible things. And if you can see the copy underneath, right by the logo at the bottom, together we give invisible wings to the colorful things that grow in the hearts and the minds of children. So we just started playing with the idea, what if we did this kind of an ad? We thought, well, who is the audience, right? We want to communicate what we stand for. But if this was an ad, who would it be appropriate to share this with? And in fact, if we change the audience and, if we were thinking about an ad for teachers, would it look different from an ad for parents? Look different from an ad for children? It's interesting that Lauren says anyone, because we think sometimes that targeting the message and the look and the feel, it's important to know who the audience is, right? So this was sort of a springboard. This was our beginning. This was, as you can see, it wasn't in perfect form. We would never do an ad that had two logos that looked so repetitive. We would never really launch an ad that had so much copy. So this was the beginning, sort of the prototype, the what if, to say to people, do you think it works? And if it does, let's turn it into a real ad. So I'm going to transition now back to Melissa, and she's going to show you the real ad that Crayola did create that included this mindset about these wings and what her children had to say about it.
Yeah, so my students they saw this ad. So they had a different experience than what you had. They didn't see just the artwork on its own. They actually saw the entire ad with the yellow background and the photographs layered over. So we looked at it, and we were looking at this with the focus of art in advertisements and how it's used to persuade and communicate meaning. And so initially when they saw this ad, their first thought was Crayola, the audience is children. Like that's who they think, they see Crayola products and they think this is for me. And so I had to sort of really dig in with them into the copy below the artwork so they could sort of connect with who the actual intended audience is. And I don't know that my fourth graders really even realize that as an educator, I have to, continue my education. So it wasn't something that they were really aware of. But after we read over the copy again and really sort of started to piece together all of the information in the ad that we were trying to decode, they were able to then connect that the character was soaring. And so that this was an ad for teachers to learn how to support their students in their creativity. And so it was really interesting to see the process and to hear them sort of take apart the pieces. They connected the photographs at the bottom to teachers working with their children, so they really liked that visual there layered on top. And so I'm going to move ahead we're running a little low on time, and I want to share what we have been doing. So Sherry, I don't know if you want to move ahead.
Yep. Okay. So one of the things in an ad is to think about the voice you want to have. And so this is something that students can be looking at. Do you want your ad to be emotional, right? Pull on the heartstrings, logical and rational, or credible? And so part of the discussion about that ad is how emotional it was trying to be, right? And also this fits in with a rhetorical framework, a composition framework that we've used. Some of you have attended our other webinars and see we've used this before, where we start with what's the main idea of the ad, who is the intended audience, what's that voice that we just talked about before, and really this framework can work on any genre. Yes, we're talking here about advertisements, but they can be decorative posters in your room that try to persuade. They can be artifact descriptions, any piece of writing. And so it's important to connect to students that they are decoding something someone else has created, and they can use the same framework for their creations. Back to you.
So you've had this practice using Seek and having the practice of decoding an image. So I want you to think about how you might use this in your own curriculum, and you can enter in the chat what curriculum connections you could see this happening in your own classrooms. And then I can share what I've done in a few slides, but it would be interested to see if you have any ideas already. Seems like we're a little quiet on the chat, which is okay. Oh, fabulous. We've got some coming up. Class critique, art and language, arts and science, poetry, illustrate poetry, just flexing those critical thinking skills. Foreshadowing in children's literature, so looking at the illustrations to understand foreshadowing. Fabulous. And we'll keep those going, and people will be able to read through those. So the unit that I developed actually had my students decoding advertisements. And so I collected a series of ads. I focused on food and toys. I thought that would work well. I'm going to spend a little bit less time than I was planning on going through these slides just for time. But here you'll see one of the ads that
we're okay on time.
We are?
We're okay on time. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be okay.
Okay. Sorry. I thought we were running a little late. Okay.
So we are, but that's okay.
Okay. Good. So this slide was image was shared with my 4th and 6th graders, and so we looked at the art and we decoded it. And so we see here an advertisement for Heinz ketchup. And so my students looked at the image, and they also looked at the copy down below. It says, "No one grows ketchup like Heinz." And so my students looked at this and noticed that instead of saying makes, they actually highlighted grows. And then the fact that the Heinz ketchup bottle is actually looks like sliced tomatoes. And so they were, Heinz is promoting that it's, made of just tomatoes. It's actually grown. It's not created. And so they were really intrigued by just how this ad actually was made. And they were, wondering about how it was created, the visual of the tomatoes looking like the bottle. And then some other advertisements we looked at had a really interesting conversation. And so we looked at these 2 Lego advertisements. What they noticed when they were looking at them, they noticed that there was a boy and a girl in both of the ads, which they really liked. We had a really interesting conversation in both my 4th and 6th grade classes about the idea that these were toys that were not just advertised for girls or boys, talking about gender toys. And so they really liked that these were an ad that was promoting the same toy for both boys and girls. And they shared with me their frustration of seeing toys that are only marketed towards girls and boys. So it was really great to hear their feelings about that. And then they were talking about how some of the copy, it says, Lego toys build anything, especially pride. So it's going after that emotional, parents obviously want their children to have pride. And you see these kids, really proud about what they created. And so they were really excited. I did pull older ads because I didn't want them to be ads that my students were used to seeing. So I tried to pull things that were a little bit older. But it was a really interesting conversation that we had. And then these last two were really interesting because I ended up having to give them some historical context. They saw the first one on the left and they're like, corn syrup, this is terrible for you. Why would you be eating corn syrup? And so I needed to give them some clues about, how the times have changed. At one point, people were, eating corn syrup and people were advertising it as something that makes you healthy. And then the other one on the right, we have the Campbell's soup. And so it's small, very small text, but it says, healthy children of all ages love Campbell's vegetable soup. And so they were really great at noticing that they're advertising healthy food, they're advertising strength, the boxing gloves connected to energy. And they noticed that the child reaching out. So there's these visuals adding. This, I see a question. It says, is this in a school setting? Yes, this was in my art classroom. So 25 children in a public school. So after we looked at the art, their assignment, which is going to be your assignment as well, was to create their own art that for an advertisement for an event, either, a school event or initiative. At my school, we have Green Team. And so the kids, could have made an advertisement for Green Team. Here on the screen, you'll see that our ice cream social, which is actually tomorrow night, was very popular. Lots of students decided that needed advertising. And so you'll see there's some variety in their design choices. So we've got the ice cream, and the process was they had to brainstorm an event or an initiative or an activity or an experience that they wanted to create an advertisement for. And then for fourth grade, I had them work in groups. And for sixth grade, they worked independently. And they had to brainstorm ideas and then do a planning sketch and then create their advertisement, which included the visual. And then we also talked about copy. So they had to, incorporate some sort of text to help communicate their idea. And then we've got some more. Another really event that they were excited about is movie night. It actually had just been happening right around the time when we started this unit. And so you'll see that the artwork in the center, or the ad in the center, he was highlighting movie night. And so the text is brighter and larger and sort of popping off the page. And then they also created this sort of stage to reference that it's going to be a movie, even though I don't think the kids are used to seeing movies at theaters like that. But they were using their visual to communicate the idea of this movie night and the excitement. It's hard to read some of the copy that they wrote. I think the center one says, a place to hang out and watch a movie. It was a struggle to sort of get them to balance how much copy and how much visual they needed. With the group project, the fourth graders who worked in groups, I found they did a nice job of conferencing with each other because they had to come up with a group idea. With the sixth graders, I tried to conference with them as I could, but it's hard with 25 kids. But I was able to work with them from the planning stage into their final design. And so these are a few other, we have the book fair, and let's see, I think we have Games Day, which is another, we have a Polar Pride picnic, which the students, are playing different games. So the thing I really liked is it being student driven. The kids were able to select what they were really interested in and create the ad that they were most invested in for the initiative or the event that they were mostly intrigued with and wanted to support. It was really nice for me also to see the kids who gravitated toward, field day or gravitated toward the book fair. So it gave me a little insight into their interests. And then finally, Sherry mentioned this one earlier. A group of my fourth graders actually decided to advertise my classroom. And so they did a portrait. You'll see there's a student, they took a picture of me and we're working from that picture to create the drawing because I could not stand still for them to draw my portrait. I had other students to work with. So they did some nice problem solving with that. And then they created a really lovely tagline for my classroom. It says, "Come to Miss Hayes's classroom if you want to let your creative spirit shine." At the time I did have blue hair. That was earlier this year. And like I was saying before, I really feel like the group work, as difficult as it can be to sort of manage and juggle group work, I think it's really great because they had that built-in conferencing that they were able to work through. And I think their advertisements were stronger because even though they were the younger grade, they had that ability to sort of really fine-tune their ideas by sort of working it out together.
Okay, so just as a springboard now for your assignment, you can take any piece of artwork that your students have done or that you have created and think about using that as a springboard for your ad. So we have another piece of student art, a sixth grader, Erica from California, and we say, what if this was an ad, right? Whoops, clicked a little too fast. So use Seek and use the text chat box to talk about what you see, what evidence you have, explain the artist's decisions, what do we know and what do we want to know. So, please text away. We're a little short on time, so I'm going to be sharing with you some of the things that we've heard from others we've shared with this. Often people focus on the set of glasses and that within the lenses of the glasses, there's a creative experience that's very bright and clear, and that around it, it is filled with dirt, trash, very dark, cloudy. And so when you think about what you're seeing and what we know and we want to know, that can be that springboard for what we do with it next. Yes, very much environmental and ecology. So if you were making an ad around this piece of artwork, what would be your main idea? So I saw environmentalism, recycling, how about a new view, change, opportunity, responsibility, vision, a student's vision of a better environment, if there's a bit of optimism there. Oh, beauty in the eye of the beholder, absolutely. So you can imagine that any piece of artwork can then be that springboard for how you would turn it into an ad. So you might use a piece of student art as your springboard, or you can create your own piece of art. So the assignment we'd like you to do to post is to now generate your own original ad for an idea or an event or an item, and to be creating that artwork, creating that ad, or as we said, if you'd like to insert some student work as the art, that's fine too. We look forward to your sharing your ad and your insights. Could be an example of your student work, just like Melissa shared the ads that her students have made. That would be a fine entry for you to post to. We do want you to be sure to get parental permission when you post a piece of student artwork. And I saw some questions come up in the chat. When we share student work, we only use first name, last initial, and then we tell you the grade or the age of the child so you get a sense of the developmental spectrum of students that we're sharing work, and we can easily put the state, but we protect children's privacy by not providing their last name and their direct location. And that's our national policy to protect children. Obviously, if you're in your own school community, you follow your school's, your community's privacy policies. But I did see some questions there. So if you are posting student artwork in the Crayola Creativity community on EdWeb, we ask that you get the parental permission to share that student artwork. That is part of our policy. So just thinking about next steps, if today's webinar whet your appetite for conversations around how art links with literacy and how visual literacy is as an element and a key way we communicate, that it is a special, unique form of literacy that fits into the span of multi-literacies. We have a complete professional development program around multi-literacies that includes literacy draws upon art and math as a visible language, so lots of information about storytelling and art. So that is available to you. And for more information, just send an email to creativelyalive@crayola.com. We always like to close our webinars by asking each participant to think about their next steps, right? It's always good when you're right in that moment, you're inspired in the webinar, to just jot a note to yourself, answering some key questions about your next steps. So usually start with, so what big ideas stuck with you? And you guys are used to this. You're already like answering this question even before we got to this page. I saw a lot of text chats about Seek and that you're excited about using Seek with your students. Absolutely. That is a big idea. Also, I saw some comments about using old advertisements and really starting to think seriously about what's missing in those ads and what makes them feel so dated. I really appreciate the comments I saw in the text chat about they lack diversity and that the kids' images there don't necessarily look like the kids in our classrooms, and how today's ads reflect more of who is in our school, who's in our classroom, who we are, what is our face. And those are wonderful conversations to have around diversity, not only the gender that Melissa's students talked about, but all sorts of diversity that we'd want to see in today's ads. So using an old ad can spark lots of those good conversations, and I'm glad you brought that up. How will you teach students about art being a persuasive language? I just want to remind you of Melissa's slides that talked about the tools, the vocabulary that artists use when we talk about art, when we create art, the art elements and the principles of design. So really good resources for you to be planning in your next steps. Think about what advertisements or websites or other visuals that you're going to use to teach children about Seek and how to use that protocol. And then in addition to the what and how and, sort of why questions, we like to get really specific in your planning next steps to say when, right? Make a note to yourself. When will your students be creating ads and experiencing this discussion about the power of visuals to persuade? Because once you make a commitment to yourself that it's going to fit in where it's going to be in your schedule, it's more likely to happen. So that's planning the next steps. As you know, we always remind people that when they post the artwork, the first 50 educators to post will receive the Crayola product. It's really easy to do, guys. Join the community and you'll get some instructions on how to post by April 3rd. And just to note here, and I'm so excited that we have so many, such broad representation around the globe in the webinar today, but for shipping purposes, we are only able to ship this gift for U.S. and Canadian citizens. So sorry about it. It's just a shipping regulation with duty, et cetera. But we would still love to see your ideas, but we're just not able to send the thank you gift to anyone except for U.S. and Canadians. So questions and answers. Yep, I'm going to look and see what kinds of questions have been tossed our way, and we really want to be sure that we hear from Melissa. Oops, don't want to disconnect my piece here. So I know, Melissa, there was a question about your classroom and that you were actually explaining to people you were doing this in multiple grade levels. So you were doing it in your art room. Want to talk a bit about how you varied it for the different age groups?
Yeah, so I teach in a public school in Massachusetts. So I have, 20 to 24 to 25 kids. I did tested this out with my fourth and sixth graders. I have been sort of thinking about how you could do this with a younger group of students. I was sort of thinking that I had my younger students looking at how art is a persuasive language. We looked at picture books, but if you were really interested in connecting the advertisement piece, I haven't tested it out, but I was envisioning that you could do something where instead of making a piece, you're just having a conversation about an advertisement that you're looking at. And then maybe as a class, you sort of brainstorm, so the teacher would facilitate brainstorming what this new ad would look like. Instead of having all of the students create their own ads. Another thing that came up when I was listening to you, Sherry, I was thinking about sort of flipping it like you did, prompting the students with an image and having them then decide what is this image advertising. So sort of flipping it on its head, and instead of having them decide what they want to advertise, give them this image and asking them to then create what would this image advertise? What could you use this image to advertise? So I really thought that would be an interesting take.
Super. So there was also a question for you that just popped up, which was, where did you find the old ads? How did you find them?
I did a Google search for old ads. I probably was looking, searched food. My fiance is a big Lego person, so I know I put Lego in on purpose to so he would be happy. But I literally was just a Google search, nothing fancy there.
Great. I think the next question, I can start it off, but I would love to have you respond to it. The question was that the viewer is very familiar with traditional Crayola products, but wanted to know what kind of online or electronic art tools Crayola makes. And I have to say, you guys, Melissa Hayes is the expert on using Crayola Color Alive, augmented reality, animation. So, Melissa, tell them about our products.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of augmented reality. You can get this little character, and it happens to be hanging out next to me. And we have the Color Alive, and so the students can actually create, you'll see, you can color your character, and there's also design your own, and then you can actually animate him with an app on the iPads. So you can use that. There's a whole bunch of, options to design your own idea for what your character would look like. So I've used this with some of my students, and they really liked that. I also have used digital, not digital art, but I have my kids create videos to sort of talk about their process. And I will have them share, their thinking. And so instead of always doing stuff in a group setting where we have a class conversation, I'll send my children off and have them create videos about what they're working on or thinking, and sharing their ideas. I do have a set of 12 iPads in my classroom, so I have the benefit to do that.
Great. There was a question about the piece of artwork that the student made with the Paris Eiffel Tower and the flying person, and said what was the prompt that was given. And so I can respond to that one, because I know we had an art expo, and the prompt was, what does creativity mean to you? And so we received entries from around the world. It was, and so that was the prompt, and that was really the only guidance that was given, was for students to create art that responded to what creativity meant. There was another question about, are students allowed to use templates to create their ads? And I would just like to provide a commentary from what's been important to me when I was in the classroom, was to let children express their own ideas in their own way and not restrict them with a template. So this idea of like allowing a template, I would prefer to give children a lot of freedom, expression, choice, so children can be decision makers. So I don't know if that helps to answer that question. But I know Wanda's got to come on and do the next few slides.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry and Melissa. That was really, really a great presentation. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone that you will receive a certificate of completion to the email address that you used to log into today's session, and you will receive that within the next business day. If you're joining by phone or by recording, just a reminder that you would have to take that CE quiz to get your certificate, and that can be accessed by joining our community within the webinar archive section. Also, just again, thank you. And if you're not already a member, please do join our Champion Creativity, the Power of Art Infused Education community so that you will receive the invites to the upcoming webinars and have access to all of the resources that we share within our webinars, as well as participate in our online discussions. Please do join us for the next Crayola webinar, which will be on April the 3rd. And the topic is Coaching Adult Learners Builds Creative Capacity. So that is all that we have for you today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you within the community and on our next webinar on April 3rd. Take care. Have a good afternoon.